I am the father of the groom, and at his lavish wedding reception, I was seated at table 47 right beside the kitchen door, where the smell of leftover food was stronger than the perfume of 300 distinguished guests. Not by accident, not by mistake. It was a decision. 310 guests were there that evening. Politicians, businessmen, names that only had to appear in a newspaper to become headlines. I sat there in my old navy suit, a brown paper gift in my hands, squinting through a sea of people just to catch a glimpse of my son's face at the front of the room. I raised him alone. 23 years. Not one day without a meal on the table, not one semester without tuition paid, not one night of high fever where I didn't sit beside his bed until morning. And that evening, I had been seated further back than the serving staff. I told myself, there must be a mix-up. I told myself, my son would never let this happen if he knew. I sat up straight, ordered a glass of water, and waited. Because that is what every father does. We wait. We always wait. Then Jeffrey Harcourt Mills stood up. The bride's father, a bespoke suit, silver hair, immaculately combed, a champagne flute in his hand like a prop he had rehearsed with beforehand. He tapped the glass lightly, waited for the room to fall silent, and then he looked in my direction. In a room of 300 people, he found table 47, and he looked me straight in the eyes with the smile of a man who had prepared very carefully for this moment. Then he began to speak. I won't tell you yet what he said, because to understand the full weight of those words, you need to hear them in the right order. But I can tell you this, it was not an impulsive remark, not a slip of the tongue from too much wine. Every word was chosen. Every pause was calculated. The whole room laughed because they already knew or had already guessed and were simply waiting to see the look on my face when it was over. 300 people laughing, all at once. I sat completely still, and then I looked up toward the front of the room where my son was standing in the tuxedo I had helped pay for, and I saw something worse than any insult I had just heard. My son was laughing too. He leaned his head toward the bride, covered his mouth with his hand, and laughed the laugh of someone sharing a private joke with the person they love. That joke was me. My name is Martin Calloway, 68 years old, and in that moment, I made a decision that only now, after everything that followed, I am finally able to put into words. I decided that tonight, everything would end in a way that no one in that room could possibly imagine. Because Jeffrey Harcourt Mills had just made a mistake he could not take back. He had just shown me exactly who this family really was, in front of 300 witnesses on the precise evening I had been quietly preparing for that moment for the past 6 months. And now I'll tell you exactly what he said. Jeffrey raised his glass a little higher and announced that he wanted to take a moment to recognize everyone who had gathered to celebrate this union. Then he paused, deliberately, and he said he also felt it necessary to acknowledge what he called, and I remember every syllable, the unavoidable presence of certain unfortunate elements at his daughter's wedding. He looked at me the entire time. He said it was a shame that refinement couldn't be passed down from a father who had clearly never possessed any. He said my son was lucky, that the Harcourt Mills family had graciously agreed to bring Daniel into respectable society. Graciously agreed. The woman beside me, Jeffrey's elderly aunt, completely deaf, entirely oblivious, continued eating her bread roll without looking up. I almost envied her. Around her, the room was still laughing. Jeffrey's wife Margaret was pressing her napkin to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Their son Callum had his phone raised, pointed directly at me, filming. And I understood then what table 47 really was. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't poor planning. It was a stage. They had positioned me perfectly far enough to be powerless, close enough to be seen. A front row seat to my own humiliation. I want to stop here and say something to anyone watching this who has ever sat in a room and felt that particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who have decided, collectively, that you don't count. If you know that feeling, then you don't need me to describe what the air tasted like at table 47 that night. You already know. I placed my linen napkin on the table beside my untouched plate. I reached down and picked up my brown paper gift. I tucked it under my arm, pushed back my chair slowly, without drama, without a sound, and I stood up. I didn't look at Jeffrey. I didn't look at Callum and his phone. I didn't look at Margaret. I looked at the exit at the far end of the ballroom, and I started walking toward it. The full length of that room. Past tables of strangers in their evening wear, their crystal glasses catching the chandelier light. Past the floral arrangements taller than I was. Past the ice sculpture. Past the grand piano no one was playing. Jeffrey was still speaking into the microphone, still performing, still entirely certain that the old man in the worn suit was too insignificant to do anything but absorb the humiliation quietly and stay seated. I almost reached the doors. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast ones. Almost running. Dad. I turned around. Daniel's bow tie was crooked. His face had gone the color of old paper. His eyes were wet, and he was breathing hard. He'd run from the front of that room all the way to the back, through 300 people, in front of everyone. Whatever it cost him to do that, he paid it without hesitating. Dad, please, I'm so sorry. I froze. I froze. Please don't go. I looked at my son for a long time. I looked at him the way you look at someone you have spent your entire adult life loving, someone you would do anything for, and I felt two things simultaneously. The wound of the past hour, and something else underneath it, quieter and more important. Pride. Because he came after me. Because when it actually mattered, he ran. But I had to ask. I had to know. Because love without honesty isn't love, it's just comfort. Daniel, I said, are you going back in there? Or are you coming with me? He didn't think about it. Not for a single second. He reached up, unpinned the white rose from his lapel, and set it carefully on the floor at his feet. Then he straightened up, took my arm, and said, wherever you're going, Dad. Honestly, and I've turned this moment over many times in the months since, I'm not sure I could have done what he did at 32. Walked away from his own wedding. From the woman he believed he loved. From a room full of people who would talk about nothing else for months. I'd like to think I had that courage at his age. I truly don't know. Behind us, I heard Vanessa's voice rising sharply. Then Jeffrey, his polished ballroom tone completely stripped away now. Something raw and ugly underneath, shouting Daniel's name like an order. Then Margaret, shrieking something I couldn't make out. We didn't turn around. We walked past the valet stand, past the manicured hedges, past the fountain near the entrance, and we walked toward the harbor. The night air was cool and clean. Vancouver in autumn, that particular smell of salt, water, and cedar that I have loved since the first day I arrived in this city 40 years ago. The lights of the North Shore were reflected on the inlet. Somewhere in the distance, a tugboat was moving through the dark. I took out my phone and made a call. The man on the other end picked up on the second ring. Martin, he said. Victor, I said. It's time. All of it. Tonight. Understood. I'll begin the full sequence now. I hung up. Daniel was staring at me. Dad, who was that? What sequence? I put my hand on his shoulder. He was 32 years old, and he looked, in that moment, exactly like the 9-year-old boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Come sit with me, I said. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. We found a bench on the waterfront path, under a row of maple trees dropping their last autumn leaves onto the pavement. The reception was still going on behind us. I could see the venue lights through the trees, hear the faint sound of music. They would be looking for Daniel by now. Looking for both of us. Son, I said, what do you know about my work? He blinked. You're retired. You did resource consulting. You worked up north for years, you said. That's what I told you, I said. That's what I told your mother for the first 9 years of our marriage. I took a breath. Daniel, my name is Martin Calloway. That part is true, but I am not a retired consultant. For the past 41 years, I have been the founder, majority shareholder, and sitting chairman of a holding company called Callaway Pacific Holdings. We carry no public name. We operate through subsidiary structures and intermediary entities. But Callaway Pacific holds controlling positions in approximately 19% of TSX-listed resource and energy companies. We also hold substantial positions in Pacific agriculture, commercial real estate across 3 provinces, and a private infrastructure fund in Southeast Asia. Daniel was perfectly still. As of last Thursday's market close, I said, my personal net worth is 2.1 billion Canadian dollars. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He was looking at me the way you look at a room you've lived in your whole life when someone switches the lights on properly for the first time and you realize the walls are a completely different color than you thought. I never told you, I said, because your mother and I made a decision the week you were born. You would grow up without the weight of it. Normal school, public transit, summer jobs at the marina. Frances said, and I remember her exact words. She said she would rather raise you hungry and decent than comfortable and hollow. She used that word specifically, hollow. Your mother was very deliberate with language. I paused. When she got sick, I asked her if I could tell you. She said no. She said wait until he has built something of his own, until he knows who he is without the money underneath him. She made me promise, and I kept it. Dad, let me finish. There's a house in West Vancouver, the one I live in. I told Vanessa it was a rental I'd moved into after downsizing. It isn't a rental. I've owned it since 1992. It has a garden Frances planted along the back wall, a view of the inlet from the upper floor, and a cottage on the property where a man named Victor Ames lives. Victor has been my private secretary for 29 years. You met him once, when you were 6 years old. You called him Uncle Vic. He gave you a model train set that you kept until you were 14. Daniel's voice dropped to almost nothing. Uncle Vic. I remember Uncle Vic. Yes. A figure appeared at the far end of the path. White dress catching the light from the promenade lamps. Running, or close to it, the hem lifted in both hands, heels striking the pavement unevenly. Vanessa. I had been watching Vanessa Harcourt Mills for 18 months. Quietly, carefully. The way you watch something when you love someone enough to see clearly what they cannot see themselves. And I knew, from 50 meters away, the difference between her real tears and her operational ones. These were operational. Darling, she called out. Daniel, please, come back inside. Dad didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how he gets at events. It was a joke. It got out of hand, please. Daniel stood up slowly. I stood beside him. Vanessa, he said, stop walking. Stay where you are. She stopped about 15 paces from us, chest heaving, mascara tracked down both cheeks. My father just publicly humiliated mine, Daniel said, in front of 300 people, into a microphone. Your mother laughed. Your brother filmed it. And you stood next to me at the front of that room and you said absolutely nothing. I need you to tell me right now, honestly, what you think should have happened in that moment. She opened her mouth. Darling, what was I supposed to say? He's my father. I can't just... That's all I needed to know, Daniel said. He turned to me. Dad, where are we going? Victor will be here in about 10 minutes. I'd rather walk. So we walked. Past Vanessa, who had begun making a sound I recognized from my years in boardrooms, the sound of a plan coming apart faster than the person can process it. Past a cluster of guests who had spilled out the venue's front entrance, phones raised, watching. Past Jeffrey himself, who appeared at the top of the steps with his silver composure entirely gone, his voice raw, calling Daniel's name like a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not as solid as he believed. Daniel did not look back once. We reached the seawall and stopped there. The city lights were on the water. A container ship moved in slow silence across the inlet. Daniel had stopped shaking, but his face was still the face of a man in the middle of understanding something very large. Dad, the phone call, the sequence. What exactly did you tell him to do? I sat down on the railing. He sat beside me. About 7 months ago, I said, I began to suspect that the Harcourt Mills family was not what it presented itself to be. I asked Victor to research them. Quietly, thoroughly. The kind of research that requires significant resources and considerable discretion. He found things. Jeffrey's wealth is largely a performance. His grandfather built real money in Pacific forestry in the 50s. His father preserved it modestly. Jeffrey himself has been a catastrophically poor steward. 15 years ago, he made a series of devastating speculative investments, private equity, in Indonesian real estate, and came very close to losing everything the family had ever built. He concealed the losses by leveraging the family estate in the Okanagan Valley. For the past decade, he has been managing his extended family's trust accounts, using a structure that is, in essence, a Ponzi scheme. The cousins, the aunts, the relatives who believe their trusts are intact and growing. The money isn't there. It hasn't been there for years. Daniel pressed his hand over his eyes. There's more, I said. Callum, he said quietly. Vanessa's brother. Yes. Victor's team spent 3 months on Callum. He runs an unregistered investment scheme through a numbered company. 51 investors, the majority of them retirees, approximately $14 million received. The money is gone. 6 days ago, I provided a complete documentation package to securities regulators through an anonymous channel. By Monday, they will have everything they need. I estimate Callum has 30 days before the arrest. Probably less. Daniel was staring at the water. And Vanessa, I said. My voice almost broke. I let it almost break. Then I continued. Victor obtained 3 years of her correspondence. I won't tell you how. Vanessa has been in a sustained relationship with a man named Sebastian Crane, a barrister based in Calgary, married, 2 children, since 4 months before she met you. The relationship has continued without interruption throughout your entire time together. There are emails, there are hotel records. There was a reservation for the night before your rehearsal dinner. They were together that night. Daniel sat down on the seawall, slowly, like a man whose legs have quietly stopped working. Why didn't you tell me? 6 months ago, 3 months ago. Why did you let it go this far? Because, I said, you would have argued with me. You would have said I didn't know her. You would have said I was seeing what I wanted to see. You might have married her anyway, and found all of this out from divorce lawyers a decade from now. I couldn't let that happen to you. So I waited. I waited for tonight for a moment where you could see with your own eyes exactly who these people are when something is required of them. And tonight you saw it. He put his head in his hands. I sat beside him and said nothing, because some things need a moment of silence before they can be properly held. After a while, he looked up. The phone call, he said. Victor. The sequence. What did you actually tell him to do? I looked at my son. The reason every dollar I ever made meant anything to me. 5 months ago, I said, Callaway Pacific purchased through 3 intermediary structures the lending position that holds the mortgage on every Harcourt Mills property, including the Okanagan estate. We now hold those mortgages. The acquisition cost me more than the terms justified. I bought the position because I wanted control of the moment. His eyes were wide. Tonight, at the moment Jeffrey began his toast, Victor authorized the simultaneous calling in of every line of credit Callaway Pacific holds against the Harcourt Mills entities. Jeffrey has approximately 68 hours to repay a figure in the region of $38 million. I do not believe he can. I expect he will lose the Okanagan estate, the Carisdale house, the Salt Spring Island property, and the gallery on West Georgia Street. All of it transfers to my holding companies if he cannot meet the call. Dad. Additionally, 2 weeks ago I instructed my media holdings to commission a full investigation into Jeffrey's financial affairs. The story publishes in a national newspaper on Wednesday, with complete documentation. The charitable foundation bearing the family name is required by its own charter to remove Jeffrey from its board within 48 hours of publication. Jesus, Dad. And Callum, I said, is already done. The regulators have everything they need. Daniel stared at me for a long time. You have destroyed them, he said. All of them. In a single evening. I looked out at the water. I said, Callum stole from retirees. Jeffrey spent 15 years stealing from his own family while pretending to protect them. Vanessa lied to you for 2.5 years. I did not create any of that. I only chose the timing. And I chose tonight because tonight, in front of 300 witnesses, they showed you who they are, without knowing what it would cost them. He was quiet for a long time. The container ship had cleared the inlet. The city hummed around us. Dad, that man in there, when he said those things tonight, you knew he would do something like that, didn't you? I had a strong suspicion, yes. You sat there. You let him humiliate you in front of all those people. You didn't say a word. You just got up and walked out. Quietly. Yes. Why not say something? Why not confront him right there? I looked at my son. Because the only thing I wanted him to be exactly himself, fully, completely, on record, so that you could never wonder afterward whether I had misjudged him. He gave me that. He gave me everything I needed, into a microphone, in front of 300 people. And the only voice in that building that had the power to actually hurt me was yours, and you ran after me. So nothing that happened in there tonight matters, not a single word of it. He started to cry then. Not the panicked tears of Vanessa on the lawn. The deep, slow tears of a grown man who has just understood several true things at once about the woman he thought he loved, about the family he was marrying into, and about the quiet old man in the navy suit who had been watching over him from a careful distance his entire life. I let him cry. I put my hand on his shoulder and I let him take the time he needed. After a while, he wiped his face with the back of his hand the way he had done at 9, at 14, every time he'd cried in front of me, and didn't want to be seen doing it. "What happens now?" he said. "Now Victor pulls up," I said, "and we go home. My home. Our home. There is a bedroom in that house that has been waiting for you for 32 years, and I am not embarrassed to say it. Tomorrow, when you're ready, we talk. And the day after that, if you want, only if you want, you'll sit down with my lawyers, and I will begin showing you the business that one day, if you choose it, will be yours. Dad, I don't know if You don't have to decide tonight. You don't have to decide this year. Whatever pace you need, whatever you decide, I'll be there either way." He looked back once toward the venue. The lights were still blazing through the trees. The music had stopped. "I'm sorry I laughed," he said, when he was talking. I don't know why I." "Stop," I said. "You're here. You came after me. That is the only thing that matters." Headlights appeared at the end of the path. A black SUV, moving slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. Victor, 29 years beside me, a man who has never once intruded on a moment that wasn't his, waited with the engine running and said nothing. We got in. Victor caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A quiet nod. The nod of a man who understood everything and needed to say nothing. "Where to, Martin?" "Home, Victor. Take us home." The city lights moved across my son's face as we pulled away from the waterfront. He was looking out at Vancouver the way a person looks at something familiar when they're seeing it properly for the first time. Not as scenery, as something they are genuinely inside of. That was 9 months ago. I want to tell you the rest, because the rest matters. Jeffrey Harcourt Mills could not raise the capital. He lost the Okanagan estate within 4 days of the wedding. The Carrisdale house sold at a steep loss the following month. But it wasn't enough. The bankruptcy was filed before Christmas. The foundation removed him from its board the morning after the story published, exactly as the charter required. I'm told he and Margaret have relocated to a relative's property somewhere in the interior. I don't know the details of their life now. I don't particularly need to. Callum was arrested 11 weeks after the wedding. He is currently awaiting trial on 26 counts. Some of the retirees whose money he took will not recover everything. Some will recover a portion, because quietly, through several intermediary channels, I directed funds to cover a significant share of their losses. I told no one. I tell you now only because I think you should understand something. Money is not power by itself. Money is only ever as good as the will of the person holding it, and the direction they choose to point it in. Vanessa married Sebastian Crane 14 months after the wedding. His divorce was reportedly complicated. I wish her nothing in particular. Daniel started at Callaway Pacific the Monday after the wedding. He insisted on beginning at the very bottom, his words, not mine. He spent 6 weeks making coffee for the analyst team. He sat in on board meetings as an observer and didn't speak unless asked. He asked good questions. He is now learning the agriculture portfolio from the woman who has run it for me for 18 years, and she has told me quietly that he has a genuine instinct for it. I think his mother would have been proud of who he's become. I am absolutely certain of it. He met someone 3 months ago. Her name is Simone. She works in marine conservation, restoring eelgrass habitats in the coastal shallows north of the city. She is kind in the specific, unperformative way that I learned to recognize in Francis. Daniel has not told her yet about any of this. He says he wants to be certain first. He is bringing her to the West Vancouver house next weekend. He's asked her to dress casually. He'll introduce me as just his dad. I think I'll wear the old navy suit. I want to say a few things before I go. To whoever is watching this, and I mean this, not as a lecture, but because I think some of you came here carrying something similar and deserve to hear it said plainly. First, wealth has never made anyone into something they were not. It only amplifies what is already there. Jeffrey Harcourt Mills had 3 generations of money, and what that money gave him was the unshakable belief that a man in a worn suit at table 47 was fair game for public mockery. That belief is not confidence. It is fear wearing the mask of confidence. A person who is genuinely secure has absolutely no need to look down at anyone. The next time you see someone treat a stranger with contempt, understand what you are actually seeing. You are seeing a frightened person, not a powerful one. Second, the greatest thing I ever gave my son was not the fortune. It was the years before the fortune, the bus rides, the weekend jobs, the learning to manage without. Those years are the reason he dropped that rose on the floor and walked out with me. Character is built in the ordinary years. You cannot purchase it later, no matter how much you have. Third, and this one is for anyone who has ever frozen in a room when someone they loved needed them to speak. Please hear this clearly. The shame is not in the freezing. We all freeze. The only shame would be in walking away afterward and pretending it didn't happen. Daniel ran after me. He caught me at the door. He made it right. You can make it right too. Most things between people that feel permanently broken will respond to repair if someone is willing to be the first one to start. I want to know where you're watching from. I read every comment, and I mean that genuinely. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think Daniel made the right call walking away from that wedding. Drop a 2 if you think he should have stayed and tried to fix things from the inside. Drop a 3 if you have ever sat at your own table 47. If you have been in a room where someone decided you were the punchline and had to decide quietly what to do with that. Because I would very much like to know what you did, whether you stayed or walked out, and what happened to you afterward. Tell me what city you're in. Tell me what time it is where you are right now. I find it remarkable, genuinely remarkable, that a man can sit on a back veranda in West Vancouver, watching the light change on the water, missing his wife, and somehow be in a room with people all over the world who understand exactly what he means. If this story reached you in some way, please consider subscribing. I'll be back soon with another one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Vancouver, British Columbia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.